What's up, everybody? It's the Digital World Podcast. I want you to see here um, the data. Because right now, I've been seeing a lot of articles talking about, inventory going up. It's the highest since, 2005 or around that time period. And what you're seeing is that we're having a lot of homes that are hitting the market. And typically, um, when you see these homes hitting the market, right, it's usually it depicts that there's been a shift, especially like during this season, right? The summer months are the hottest months for home sales. Usually, like weather's good, right? People can travel, they can go and look at things, right? It's beautiful out. It's easier to um, be able to move from point A to point B, right? And so, but this summer, you're seeing a difference. There's been uh, a lot more homes being put on the market than are being sold, right? You're not having bidding wars. It's a ghost town out there. And, I read this post talking about, realtors telling um, their prospective buyers, like, hey, you want to marry the house and date the rate. Here's the issue, right? Because, and I think this is where you're able to differentiate between really good and honest realtors versus people who maybe don't know what they're doing or know the markets and are just trying to sell the house and get some profit from it. And the thing is that, let's say you have people who bought a house at the peak of the market in 2022, right, around that time period, and they're thinking, you know what, I'll buy the house and I can just refinance later when interest rates come down. Here's the problem: how are you going to refinance a house that is upside down? Let's say you're now um, have lost money, right? Let's say you bought the house for um, in 2022, you say buy it for 500. It kept going up. It went up to like 575. Right now, in current market, it has not now come down at 490. So you've lost 10 grand from what you purchased it. How are you going to refinance a piece of property when you're upside down on the actual loan? Like, you can't. It doesn't make sense. You're not going to be able to. And so this whole narrative of like, oh, you can refinance later. It's like, well, you can't if you're upside down on your home. And so, don't know how many people are in that same situation, right? But and this is why what I'm about to show you is what makes me think that we're going to keep going up. These yields are going to go even higher. And this is why. Okay. I've explained for new people coming in, there's been a shift change that has happened since the 2020 time period. And it's interesting because Jerome Powell um, has says we've had low inflation for a long period of time, and now we're looking for a higher inflation, right? Um, to make up for the fact that we weren't able to generate enough, in the past decade or so. And my point every time I show this chart is we peaked for bond yields, at least for the 30-year, in September of 1981. Okay, ever since then, and this may be or sound counterintuitive when you're looking at this chart, but this was a bull market for bonds. So the yields were coming down, but the face value of the bond was growing, right? And so we had a 40-year sustained bull market. And the thing about these bond markets that these trends last for decades. And when it changes, you don't realize the trend has changed until far in. And my thesis is we're going higher. We've entered a bear market for bonds, and we're now going to be in a multi-decade trend for or multi-decade bear market trend for these bonds. And I believe, and we're seeing it play out, where you're going to start seeing higher interest rates on some of these mortgages. But I do believe that's going to bring down the price value of the house. Now, this next piece of information that I'm going to share with you is something very, very interesting. So, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell stated this when he testified before the Senate Banking Committee. And he was asked about the availability of mortgages in states like California, right? And his response is, in my opinion, very, very insightful. And what you're going to be seeing is that you may not be able to get a mortgage in the United States in the next decade in certain parts of the country. And here's why. He says, those banks and insurance companies are pulling out of areas, coastal areas, and areas where there are a lot of fires, Powell told the committee. So what that's going to mean is if you fast forward 10 or 15 years, there are going to be regions of the country where you can't get a mortgage. So uh, banks will not lend you money to buy a home. Why? Well, it's just, costs are going to be too high, right? They will see no reason why they need to put that amount of risk for people in order to have a mortgage. So I think this is just the beginning of it, right? Like, uh, um, life's gonna get a little harder. I think what we can expect, right? Like a lot of people, like you see Trump talking about, like, hey, let's cut rates. Too late, pal. Yada yada. But here's the thing: you look at the history of Fed rate, and you can feel it right now. You can sense that there's a economic crisis on the horizon. But the Fed always responds late, right? However, that's not to make the point of like Trump this, Trump that. What I'm not. Whenever the Fed decides to cut rates, that's when they know the crisis is right around the corner. So whenever you see the Fed cut rates this time around, if they do it later in the year, that's your cue. Get out of the markets. We're gonna be headed towards um, economic crisis, and so that's my cue. And if you look at 2008, right, the Fed was holding still, and when they cut rates, it wasn't long after when the economic crisis came about. And I think this time around, it's gonna be a lot harder, a lot harder than it was in the 2008 financial crisis. So, and in this post, Kalani Omawi said it's ironic that just after he posted this, I opened our annual home insurance bill for our home in Marin County, Northern California, and it was up 40% year over year. Meanwhile, our home has a zero fire risk rating by our insurance company. Imagine what this is doing to mortgage payments for people with mortgages. 40% is an astronomical increase. So, like I said, I think we're going to see mortgage rates go up. Will bring down the value of the house, right? So if you can afford to pay it with cash, this helps cash buyers. But nevertheless, it's going to be harder. It's definitely going to be harder. So with that being said, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe to the channel. This is the Digital World Podcast, and I'll see you in the next episode.